Hi, this is Charity Joy with the Kootenai Journal. We're here today at the Community Library Network at the Post Falls location with the director, Martin Walters. How are you today?
Good, thanks. Yourself?
Very good, and I want to thank you for graciously agreeing to this interview. Really, the intent is to give an opportunity to address some very relevant topics that are going on right now in regards to the library, especially to create a clear understanding of the duties and responsibilities of a professional librarian such as yourself, and then the purpose of material classification, as well as your minor card policy and services that are provided to patrons, and kind of what a typical day looks like at CLN with staff and patrons. All right, so let's just delve right into it, shall we?
Yes, absolutely.
Okay, well, let's start with the overview of a professional librarian and what it involves. So please tell us what it means to be a professional librarian, especially in regards to classification, procurement, and weeding of material.
Well, it's a very good question. I think outsiders looking in, certainly now, last few decades or more, they focus on the access to information as the be-all and end-all of library science. But unfortunately, from the inside, librarians actually have a different foundation. The foundation is more of the collection, evaluation, classification of information. A librarian, professional librarian, would have a drive to collect, just for the sake of this discussion, books. Let's say there's lots of other information resources nowadays, but there'd be that drive to collect books, evaluate them, classify them, shelve them, and we would do that even if access wasn't part of it. Right? Okay. So the idea of a repository of human knowledge was kind of the foundation of libraries. So the access to it, the public services side of it, comes out of that. But nowadays, certainly the outsiders who aren't necessarily part of the profession, or and with all the controversy about materials and stuff, they just focus on that one aspect, which is the access to the information. But there's a whole profession behind it, a whole science behind it. In our education and our experience, that goes towards that first part of it, the first pillar, which is collection development, and then it would be technical services, which we would break down into cataloging, classification, and shelving, how things are organized. So it's a profession I entered into with great commitment to it, and it is unfortunate, I think, that the general population only sees it from the one side, and there's certainly expertise that we have as professional librarians that goes into curating collections, separating the gold from the garbage, which I can't take credit for, but that's the term that came up in the textbooks that we used in school. That's our responsibility as sort of the curators of collections, the caretakers of sort of a repository of human knowledge.
Very good. There's obviously a chasm between factions within our community over moral values, and libraries kind of seem to be caught in the crosshairs and become a central battlefield. So I have a twofold question for you. Is it fair to say that individuals within your profession have introduced advocacy into their work? If so, how has that changed your profession, and how does it affect how you have to do your work?
Yeah, it's unfortunate. The profession has in some circles been reduced to social activism. Well, I guess for three reasons in my mind. The first one is that it really destroys one of the main principles of the profession, which is neutrality. So it's almost antithetical to that principle. So, and then the second one is it weakens the pillars I've talked about, right? So by putting the focus on social activism, you're basically taking away from the professional librarian their foundational role, which was the collection of materials, which was the assessment, evaluation, classifying, organizing information resources. So those are the two main, but actually it also affects the third thing, which is the public services side, which I've spoken about. So, once we have all our materials collected, classified the way the professional librarians deem best, then we start turning outwards to the community and saying, here's this collection that we've curated, here's access to it. But if social activism becomes the main philosophy of librarianship, then it's unfortunate for the patron, because they over time certainly they've come to expect something from the library, and that's the ability to come to the library and not be bombarded by whatever agendas are happening in other arenas. So, it's fine. Other arenas that they experience, whether it's political or in the religious circles or news media or whatever, in those other arenas, the public can expect to be, faced with different agendas and different culture wars, for lack of a better term. But the expectation coming to the library is that you wouldn't receive that there. That you'd come there and you would experience a sort of a neutral, welcoming, environment where the library was apart from that. And I think that's one of the biggest difficulties with flipping the profession towards social activism, because you're basically taking away, above all other professions or even institutions, the library was known for being neutral and not engaged in those things. So really, it hits at the heart of my profession to flip it to social activism versus what it had been for millennia. So yeah, it does make it more challenging, because there's a lot of education that needs to happen, to help the public understand that, this is not, we really should be separate from all this, right? The only politics that really should exist at the library is only in that structure where, the library serves a tax base, that tax base voted for a governing board, right? And that's kind of where it stops. So I'm here to serve the governing board, and therefore indirectly the people of the community that voted for that governing board. But after that's done, like, the library itself is not a political entity. It's not meant to be any of that. It's meant to be a sort of first a repository of knowledge of the human experience, and then, layered on top of that are the other services we offer, which would be access services, programming, right, those kinds of things. So.
Yeah, very good. So let's discuss the Idaho law that is underlying some of the concern in the community, and it directly applies to minors' access of materials in the library. And it went into effect on July 1st of last year, and it has qualified or defined into law what would be considered harmful material to minors, and then that they aren't to have access to it in a public library. So if you could please describe to us the process that CLN uses in reviewing material to comply with Idaho law.
Yeah, so there's basically, I guess, three things. There's two mechanisms that the CLN has put in place for patrons. One is the request for relocation of material form, and the other is the request for reconsideration of material. So those are two processes that everyone is probably familiar with, as far as if they watch the trustee meetings, or they can just read the policies and procedures online. So that part is pretty straightforward. I'm not really sure what the controversy is in regards to those. They're readily available. Everyone can read them, and everything is kind of laid out how they work. The one that seems to be a little bit more disconcerting for some people is the internal review process, which, again, don't want to sound redundant, but a professional librarian, a library, can review its material for any number of reasons at any time, right? So we could be reviewing material for content, we could be for format, circulation, for condition. So we can review. That's what that's what our profession is. So we
kind of in the duties and responsibilities of a librarian.
Yeah.
Okay.
So that's our expertise.
And to be clear, that was done before Idaho's law. It's always a work in progress. Yes.
Oh yeah, absolutely. I mean, like I say, I mean, if we've had initiatives in libraries, let's say we wanted to set aside all the westerns, or all the biographies, or all this or that. Like we'll separate out collections all the time, and we'll review them for content, so we can put a label on them, because everything in your local library is labeled. So that review process goes on all the time, and normally libraries just need to have a reason for it, right? I mean, if you're a traditional sort of minded librarian, you might not really favor the idea of the genreification, and some of that was born out of feeling a need to compete with bookstores. Okay. Right? A person walks in a bookstore and they see everything facing out, and it's all like romance and Western, and so everything is placed in genres, right? And so libraries would tend to, for the benefit of their patrons, would do that.
For accessibility.
So they might make those decisions. So for any number of reasons, the library can engage in reviewing its collection. Now this reason happens to be legal, right? So
Yes.
so to me, it's a valid reason. The legislation was put in place. There's no reason why the CLN shouldn't review its collection based on that. I don't see what the difficulty is with that. I mean, it just makes sense. So.
Okay. At this time, do you know how many items have been deemed harmful to a minor material by CLN staff?
Yeah, so basically all that's happened so far, which I mentioned a bunch of times at the trustee meetings, is the request for relocation of material forms, which came in. There were 16 of those items that were through that process were deemed harmful to minors.
Okay.
They haven't been relocated yet because it's a part of a process.
Right.
They'll have to go to technical services to get relabeled and
Right.
and all catalog classified. So all that stuff still has to happen. But as far as the very simple answer to the question is, those are the only items at this point.
So those 16 items themselves have been reclassified or are in the process of being reclassified, and they will be located in the library based on that classification?
Yeah, they haven't made it to the technical services department yet,
Okay.
so they're not there. I mean, partly because there was the review process was coinciding with policy, establishment at the board level. So it's like I couldn't move them anywhere until the mature
Correct.
content collection had been established. So it's a long process because
Yes.
not everything was in place. But once everything falls into place, then that process would be
Okay.
be
A lot of
expedited.
moving parts then right
Yeah,
now?
there are,
Okay,
yeah.
that's fair. And how many items do you have right now currently under review?
Yeah, so there's 140 titles, which is 0.1% of the collection.
It's 0.1% of your collection?
Yeah, 0.1% of the collection,
Yes.
is under review. And again, the review process, we just use our professional expertise. We're going to pull items based on subject headings and our experience with the publishing industry and authors. And so we're just going to go and try and assess. We're not going to immediately go to cookbooks or something, which there's not much likelihood that they're going to break the
Yes.
law, right? So
Okay,
again,
yes.
the review of the material is, and I'd like to just stress this to everybody, the only thing that's happening is a review of the material in light of the Children's School and Library Protection Act. Like, there's no other content evaluation going on. It's not even the spirit of the law, it's just the letter of the law, right? We're just reviewing this material against the letter of the law, and if they are, they are. If they're not, they're not, and we just move on.
Okay. Currently, the establishment media in both Spokane and Coeur d'Alene have published multiple news and opinion pieces that are kind of lambasting your minor card policy. And it feels that what I've heard from the community is that there's confusion over the minor card policy and about how it works and parental rights. So if you could please explain the parameters surrounding the minor card policy, how it's obtained, what kind of control parents have regarding their child's access to library materials and services.
Yes, it's pretty straightforward. There's basically two choices. A parent can choose one of two levels. One level is called the limited access card, and that, I'll just back up a little bit. So we're talking about library cards,
Yes.
which means we're talking about the ability to borrow a material using a barcode on the back. So the library card at the desk, and they scan it, and that barcode allows them to do something in the ILS, right? Which is different than access, right? If people watch the trustee meetings, they know we talked about moving through the building and what,
Right.
and that's a different discussion. This discussion is about a library barcode on a card,
Okay.
and what that
That's a good
barcode,
distinction,
what that
so thank
barcode
you.
can do,
Yes.
right? So right now, the one library card option is the limited access card, which enables the parent to say that their child can borrow books from any collection that's curated for minors. So the children's collection, the teen collection, they've had different names. You can call it young adult, youth, whatever. But basically, any of the collections in the CLN branches that were curated for 0 to 17, right? That's what that card can enable them to borrow. And then the other card is what we would call a general access card. So the general access card enables the child or the parent to give their child a card that gives them access to the entire CLN collection. Okay, so now, obviously, at the same time this is happening, we've established what we call the mature content special collection. So the mature content special collection is a collection pursuant to the Children's School and Library Protection Act, and that's the stuff that will be in there, right, that material. And their barcodes wouldn't enable them to check that material out. Okay, but that doesn't mean they don't have access to it, because access to it is a different thing than card barcode ability. So their access to the mature content collection, again, falls to the parents. They have to comply with the law. Again, our policies are available to be read So I feel the CLN has taken the best course to uphold both parental authority and the law, because we're basically allowing the parents to simply choose, just the children's minor collection for them, the entire collection. They obviously can't borrow from the mature content collection, but if they wanted to access the mature content collection, they just have to comply with the federal, the state law, which allows for the parents to accompany them to that. So, again, obviously there's another thing not unspoken here, which is what impact this has on CIN. Right?
Correct. We're getting there.
Yeah, well, which is fine. But again, it's really important for
Yes.
people to understand that it's a
Yes.
completely separate issue.
Correct.
The library card for minors policy governs our patrons only.
Correct.
Like, it's not meant to. We have no governing authority over any of the other libraries in CIN, so it has nothing to do with them.
Yes.
There are impacts, and we're analyzing that. But anyway, it's just an important distinction. That
Yes.
there is nothing in the community library network collection that is being restricted to minors, right? The
Yes.
library cards have potential power within the ILS based on their barcodes. That has an effect on what can be borrowed. But the very simple, straightforward answer is that there really isn't anything in the CLN collection which minors are being restricted.
So, for instance,
Yes.
a 15-year-old were to be browsing shelves, sit down in a chair, start reading a book or a title of some kind, there isn't going to be a CLN staff member coming over there and asking them if they have the appropriate access card, because that's not what is happening with those cards. Those cards are if you're borrowing it and removing it from the premises. Is that correct?
Yeah.
Okay.
So, but again, I mean, just to be completely clear, right? The legislation, obviously caused an effect upon all libraries, and each library had to make decisions, right? So, from what I understand, there's some small libraries who had to take a certain course of action,
Yes.
and then there would be some libraries that might be just a single branch with two floors,
Yes.
and they could take certain actions, right? So the decision being made by the CLN, by the board, and myself as the director, is based on the fact that we have 7 branches, right? And we need to comply with this law, and how does that look? So the choice, and people can watch the trustee meetings to see the evolution of
Okay.
how we arrived here. And again, my job as a professional librarian was just to present to the board different options. And so the option that we're kind of going with, for those who are familiar with, library science or the professional library world, it's a special collection, right?
Correct.
Which libraries have always used, right? We have a special collection on genealogy. We have all sorts of different special collections, and to some extent, the children's section is a special collection. They all have different parameters on what's in there based on how that's defined. So it is a special collection. It has a location, right?
Yes.
And so, to go back to your point, just so that there's no confusion, right? The whole idea with the general access card is that, yes, a 15-year-old could be anywhere in the library,
Correct.
pick up a book off the shelf and read it freely. That's not an issue. And they can also check out anything that they find in the general collection throughout all the branches. But the special collection, right, called the mature content collection, does have restrictions set on it based on the law.
Right.
Right, these are restrictions based on the law. They're not restrictions that the CLN dreamed up for some reason.
Correct.
They're just based on the law. So, and it's not, I mean, we used to have reference collections, right? And no barcode could check out a reference book, right?
Okay.
So there's nothing unusual happening here. It's just all falls within the parameters of professional library standards.
So it's like the public needs re-educated on how libraries work a little bit, plays into why there might be some confusion?
I mean, I think so. Again, it's not their fault. Obviously, the onus is
Right.
on the library to be able to educate and inform people about what services we offer and how they're offered. So, I mean, we have the work to do. It's not on the patrons to necessarily to know these things, right? This is ours.
Okay.
This is our professional expertise, and it's part of our responsibility to communicate to them.
Fair enough. So in relation to the minor's card, and you touched on it, was CLN's partnership with the Cooperative Information Network, which we all refer to as CIN. So there's going to be several questions relating to that. And the first is to please explain the relationship between CLN and CIN and what benefits patrons receive from this relationship.
So, I mean, the easiest way, I guess, to explain it is, so libraries like to share things. So we do. Like we like to share things. And one mechanism for sharing between libraries is something we call a consortium. There's other methods, but this is the one we're talking about. So CIN is a consortium of libraries, which means it's a bunch of individual libraries, whether it's a library district or a city library, a school district. It's an individual library with its own governance board, its own director, like independent, autonomous. And they decide to join up together for some purpose, and we'll call it a consortium. So typically that consortium is focused on sharing electronic resources, typically. And historically, certainly in the case of CIN, they're entered into, CIN was entered into in 1980s in order to contract for an ILS. So I'll just say that. So
Go ahead.
we all remember card catalogs.
Yes.
A beautiful, nice wood, and you'd pull out the drawer and you could search for an item by title, author, or subject.
Yes.
Right? Okay. So, and then in the 80s, with the dawn of more electronics and the internet in the 90s and all that kind of stuff, so we moved away from that to an online version. And they used to be called, one of the common terms was an OPAC, Online Public Access Catalog. Okay. I refer to it all the time as an ILS because it's an integrated library system. So companies out there, big companies, small, all different sorts of companies, right? They create these platforms, software platforms, which we call ILSs. And in the 80s, a lot of libraries wanted to get on board with that. So the purpose of the CIN in 1984, I think it was, the purpose of CIN was to join together, and I think there might have been a grant involved, to join together to be able to contract a shared ILS.
Okay.
That was the purpose of it. So a whole bunch of libraries joining together so that they can all take advantage of this new technology, which is an ILS. Okay, it was 42 years later, right? We've come a long way with ILSs. But a consortium is essentially libraries sharing typically electronic resources.
Okay.
If they were sharing physical resources, that's a bit different because we can do that with other mechanisms like interlibrary loan, right?
Yes.
Interlibrary loan, reciprocal borrowing agreements, non-resident library cards. There's other methods within which we can share physical resources, but typically consortiums come together to share electronic resources or some other thing. So with CIN and CLN, basically that's what we do. We share three things: an ILS, a courier system, right? A van moves things around, and the electronic resources, which we'll simplify by saying overdrive. And we can talk about that later, but overdrive. So those are the three things. The physical collections, the CLN physical collection is entirely CLN's.
Okay.
And Coeur d'Alene's physical collection is entirely theirs. And there's no ownership there's no sharing, or governance over that. There's sharing obviously with, but there's no governance over it. So it's autonomously owned by each individual library.
Okay.
So that's when I say that there isn't any CLN material that's being restricted to minors, right? And then people think, oh, well, yeah, but what about all this other stuff? Okay, so that's not CLN material. That's CIN material. So CLN is a big player in CIN, obviously. Just aren't exact numbers, but let's say around 130,000 items are CLN items. And then about 140,000 items are everybody else's items. So
CLN makes up almost half of the
total. We're talking
resources within that.
That's correct.
Consortium.
We're talking physical collection, about half. Yeah.
Okay.
So, and if you want me to go on, basically, if we're going to talk electronic resources, right? At the last trustee meeting, I tried to report to the trustees about various other electronic resources that CLN does have independently, but the thing that is shared is Overdrive. And Overdrive is a digital content company where you subscribe to it and then you curate your collection there. So there's about 20,000 ebooks.
Within Overdrive?
Not all, within our, for CIN.
Okay.
Yeah, Overdrive's probably about millions.
Okay.
But so CIN jointly pays a subscription to Overdrive.
Okay.
And in that collection, we provide access to all CIN patrons shared, right? About 20,000 ebooks and 10,000 electronic audiobooks.
Okay.
So Overdrive does other stuff too. One of their platforms, Canopy, does documentaries and videos. But for us, the focus here, not for us, but for CIN, the shared collection is ebooks and electronic audiobooks, because you could
Okay.
still get audiobooks on disc if
Yeah.
you wanted to.
Oh,
but-
really?
Yeah, I mean, you could, I suppose. But anyway, so that's what we're talking about with Overdrive, right? So that's that content that's shared. I don't want to get ahead of your question.
No,
so
no,
if
you're
you-
fine.
yeah.
No, because I was just gonna, is, what has come up in the community is that there's somehow a problem because some of these libraries that are within CIN are across state lines in another state. And so their material is something that doesn't, Idaho law doesn't apply to. And if there's somehow that CLN is restricting someone's access to Overdrive or to the ability to access any of that material because of, say, a minor card status.
Yeah, and again, so I think it's important to go back to the distinction of what, so we're talking about a barcode on a card, right? So, because I think, the idea here with the law is that the CLN, certainly the board, the mandate from the community is that the CLN doesn't want to break the law by providing access, right, to minors, material that would be deemed harmful to minors.
Correct.
So when you're in a shared consortium situation, really it comes down to the providing of. So what's being restricted is in that barcode, the minor CLN patron is unable to place a hold
Okay.
on, let's say, just, well, for the sake of the Washington component, Liberty Lake.
Okay.
Right? So a Liberty Lake book can't be placed on hold by the CLN card because that barcode is restricting.
If the parent chose that for their child, if the parent chose the full access one.
No,
for
it's
their
still,
child. Oh,
it's
still.
still both cards don't provide access to the
Ability to place holds outside
yeah,
of CLN?
exactly.
Okay.
Yeah, the ability
Okay.
to borrow outside of CLN
Okay.
using the electronic side of things. So in other words, if the parent, or however, if the minor goes to Liberty Lake and uses their card at Liberty Lake, and they check out a book that's deemed harmful to minors, it's probably not deemed harmful to minors at Liberty Lake, but if for some reason it was, that's Liberty Lake.
Correct.
We have no governance. We're not going to step on anybody's toes. It's not our job to do any of that. So that's not what this is about. This is simply about, we don't want that item moved over
Here.
to a branch of CLN and have one of our staff people hand it to the minor card, because that would now be us providing access
Okay.
to an item. So that's
Fair
really, that's kind of what's happening in this situation, which is the one piece about physical items.
Okay.
And the only thing that's actually being restricted is the ability of that barcode to make that hold and have it delivered to our desk here so that our patron, that our staff person hands it to the minor.
And obviously, nothing would be stopping a parent from placing a hold on that book and picking that book up at CLN.
Absolutely, yeah. So the parent's barcode has the ability to do all that.
Yes.
And again, this is where CLN is absolutely 100%, honoring parental authority.
Yes.
I mean, that's parents can do whatever they want. I'm a parent, and I would never stand for
Right.
my authority as the father of my family to be usurped by others. So yeah, 100%. That's what's happening. The other component, again, it goes back to the other electronic aspect of this discussion, which is e-resources.
Correct.
So one thing that because the barcode is electronic, it gets scanned, it's working in an electronic system, so you can't place the hold.
Okay.
The other thing you can't do would be access those e-resources,
Okay.
right? Because they're also shared, and CLN doesn't have control or ownership necessarily of those items.
Okay.
Right, but that's not to say, and this is why with the discussions with the card policy there was some confusion, because the CLN actually pays probably about half of the budget for the resources is coming from CLN, but it's all shared. But we're interested, and the CLN is analyzing the situation, and we hope to continue analyzing it with CIN. But we want to see whether or not we can curate within Overdrive a collection that could be accessible.
Okay.
Right? But again, as I've said before, a lot of this has to do with the abilities within the platforms, right? Can the system, for lack of a better term or specific term, can the system understand what this barcode is and apply certain regulations to it? So it's a work in progress in that sense. But again, the policy card for minors isn't really about CIN, it's about
Right.
CLN. So
CLN only, yes.
yeah, so we do have to iron out what it is.
Do you know how many libraries that are part of CIN that are separate from CLN? Because you said you have 7 libraries
Yeah.
within our network here.
I don't know, I know that there's 16 members. There's 16 members, some are districts, some are, so Coeur d'Alene is a city library, so, but there are some district libraries. I don't think any of the district libraries have 7. I think there's some that with 3 or 4.
And all of the directors of these libraries meet on a regular basis?
Yeah, so once a month, although we don't do one in December, I don't think. And once a month, there's a CIN meeting and again, the joint power agreement, the current one that is currently in place, talks of the board as being the governing body of the CIN. So I'm a representative. The director attends the meeting as the voting member, as the representative
Yes.
of the governing board of the individual member library. So
Okay.
again, I'm very happy. It's been 42 years, so I'm very grateful that CIN is taking the time now to look at their joint power agreement and consider, revising it, trying to figure out what's the best way to move forward. I mean, it's a great thing to do, right?
Yeah,
Because it's
yeah.
been 42 years, and the purpose of it 42 years ago doesn't exist as much now, right? I mean, we don't have to all jump on board and help each other financially to get an ILS nowadays, right?
Right.
So in that sense,
There's a lot of other platforms that provide.
yeah, I
these
mean,
services.
yeah, that doesn't need to be its purpose anymore. It does need to have a purpose, and they need to look at that, and that's fine. I do hope that that's that we can work together on it, because it doesn't seem insurmountable. But the general population needs to understand, and this is the difficulty, right? Because it's a great thing that the ILS is seamless and that overdrive and everything looks really great when a patron uses it, right? That's the whole purpose of these user interfaces, to be really intuitive and user-friendly. The problem is that I'm sure a lot of patrons look at that catalog and they think they're looking at one collection, right? They look for a book and they see the book show up, they see the overdrive book show up, they see ebooks, audiobook, they see it all there together. And in their mind, they're thinking, oh, this is one collection. And and so you shouldn't be restricting anything. But it's not one collection. It's 16 different,
Understood.
collections that
Yes.
happen to be shared, right,
Okay.
in an ILS. And they're all got different governing boards, right? So this is where, and now you have this legislation laid over top,
Yes.
right? So Idaho's a very unique situation, right? And then a consortium in Idaho becomes even more unique, right?
Yes.
Because there's different layers to it, and we need to just all do the best we can with them.
Who knew a library was this interesting? So let's discuss the services and how CLN staff serves patrons. So first, the board recently approved a new full-time HR position. In the last meeting, the assistant director estimated that she currently spends about 2+ days doing human resource work. So tell us how it will benefit both patrons and staff for this new position.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's important to realize this is not an isolated situation. Like when I first came here mid-September, I know previous to my coming here, there was a lot of work being done at sort of the branch level with reassessing, efficiency.
Because you have, I'm sorry to interrupt, you have how many employees?
About 60, well, we're doing some hiring, and we just did some, so we'll say mid-60s, 65, 66, but it's going to change.
And if anyone hasn't done a hiring process, describe what goes into a hiring process, just because, I mean, this is what human resources would do, yes? And
Well, yeah, that's the thing. I mean, but like to go back to I just want to.
yes, sorry.
No, that's okay. It's just, if they watch the trustee meetings, they know that another thing I did since I've been here was separate out another position which was merged, which was the technical services and the collection development position. That's been historically one position here, and there's other areas in the institution. For me, this is all about creating the most efficient and effective organizational chart. So I want my financial officer to focus on finances, and I want my administrative team to focus on administration, and then the HR specialist becomes exactly that, an HR specialist. And there isn't one. And so
Oh, there isn't one at all, not even part-time?
No, there isn't one.
Oh,
and that's why
okay.
yeah, so it's shared, right? The administrative team which is made up of the business manager, the assistant director, and myself, right? We meet regularly, a couple times a week, and we spend a lot of time
Understood.
on HR, right? And we think to ourselves every single time, right? We got other things to do, right? To run this organization. So it's long overdue.
I
right?
mean, lucky you, you have the largest library district in the state of Idaho.
Yeah, I mean, it's long overdue. We need an HR specialist. I need my financial officer to focus on finances and not have to spend that time. I need my assistant. So my assistant director is actually sort of oversees the branch level. So that we have 7 branches. They each have a branch supervisor, right? And that's on her side of the organizational chart, right? That's what she helps me manage is all that the frontline type stuff and I don't want to jump the gun on what you were asking, but yeah, like people need to understand this is a district library system, so some things are centralized, right? So communications department, facilities, technical services, collection development. These would all be different, floors in a single library. There might be different offices, but this is a multi-branch library district system, and so some of that stuff is centralized. So essentially, what's happening at the branch level would most easily be described as public services.
Okay.
It's the public services department, right? And each of those branches has a library supervisor. It would be construed as the department head of public services, and then the staff that run that. So, and that's, to me, it's probably one of the most important departments because it's the front-facing department. It's what everybody
Yeah.
sees.
So with someone like myself who's not tech savvy, needs to go in and use the computer system to maybe get something printed, that is who's assisting
Yes.
with those direct interactions with the public, with your patrons to meet the need that they came in for.
Yeah, absolutely, and that's why it's vital that there's that sort of connection to the community, right, in that public services department. Whereas where the other departments might not need that connection, with technical services, right, even assessing the whole collection and collection development can be done, right, at a district level.
Yes.
Right, but what we need at the front line is all those skill sets that we appreciate with customer service, and I maybe you wouldn't be surprised, but the kind of questions you get at the library, like the frontline staff need to be able to pivot on, like, can you help me print this tax form? The next question is, hey, I'd like to find this book. I remember it was red and it had a dog on it, right? And then you might get, I mean, the days of getting really in-depth reference questions, right, which was the bread and butter of the profession. That's kind of veered into the academic library world, right? And unless you had a New York Public Central, like a big city branch, you might have a person who's like trained and dedicated reference librarian answering multi-hour, multi-day type questions that they have to work on. Okay, but that's not necessarily the run-of-the-mill question that they're going to get. But there's so much reader's advisory. Someone comes in and says, "Hey, I just read this. It's such a great book. What do you think I should read next?"
Oh, okay.
Right. Yeah. So the front desk, it's a very specific skill set. We want customer service type people who have a great sense of the collection and reading, because those are the questions they're getting. And it could come across any.
I imagine that's very helpful for parents to have someone help identify reading levels while their children are beginning to read.
Yeah, absolutely. And nowadays, I mean, there's a database now called Novelist. Okay. It's an EBSCO product, I think. But before the dawn of Novelist, like, this would have been the purview of the librarian. They would have been asked the question like, hey, what should my child read at this age? They like this genre, they like that. So nowadays, it's a great product, Novelist, where you can do all that searching and get the answer. Like, okay, I'm looking for this
So
age.
Computers really are replacing people?
No. I mean, no, I don't think so.
I'm just
No,
teasing.
that's all right. But I think it's funny because to me as a librarian, like there's never been any threat of that. Like they talk about the death of the book or this or that thing. Yeah. But I mean, even if you think about AI, the concept of you have this huge database of digital content and you throw an algorithm or a keyword at it and hope to get something back, right? That's essentially a definition for a librarian. Walk up to the desk, throw a question at them, and they go and bring it back. So, we're real intelligence now. We're real, like artificial librarian, right? Is a lot of stuff that's happening in the AI world, right? And it actually reinforces the value, I think, of the librarian, right? That is our speciality. Right? That's what we have done. So.
Very good. So, question, you had mentioned it earlier in the interview about prominently displaying stuff and how that was kind of an homage to competing with bookstores or the public's how they like things presented to them. So is there a protocol that goes into the selection of what material is promoted on display?
I mean, the
Is it
short,
more of a
well, the
judgment
short
or-
answer is no. I mean, that, I mean, since I've been here, I haven't got a chance to dive into this. I mean, the idea here, certainly from my perspective as the director, is I do want to restore the proper professional library standards to CLN, right? So that this idea of neutrality is something that's understood and appreciated by all staff. So I don't know if there's a written down protocol per se, right? Like it's handled at the branch level, the library supervisors, you know, and they're in charge of, I mean, there's some, you know, there'd be some discussion down the road as, you know, is a display, let's say in a glass case or something, is that done by the programming department or is that done by public services department, and who does that? But like turning out a book, facing it out, right? That's usually done at sort of the very the front line level. So the people who are shelving the books and they have a empty spot there, they turn it out. So, but again, you know. Certainly, going back to the discussions about, you know, social activism versus, you know, the traditional thought of the profession, you know, even in those instances, right, the patron should be able to come to the library, and this should exhibit neutrality. It should exhibit quality of our collection, right? It should exhibit balance, right? If it's construed that it's exhibiting social activism or something, then yeah, this is something that would need to be looked at and said, you know, what is the institutional identity of the CLN? You know, what are we trying to accomplish? So,
What programs do you have available right now that are promoting reading?
yeah, programs is huge. It's funny because obviously I've talked a lot about the traditional, you know, mandate of libraries, right, with collections. But I think it's important to realize that the programming in libraries is essentially bringing those collections to life. So, you know, I you know, it's if we have books on cooking, right, then you could have a program, right, that's, you know, that's a cooking-based program or something, and the tie-in is always with the collection, right, and what we have as information resources. So, so quite often people will you know, see a program which isn't necessarily related to reading or their idea of reading and literacy. So, so we do so many programs, and I would definitely encourage people to look at the website. We put out a great catalog for our summer reading program, and everything's listed there. But on our website,
What is your website?
communitylibrary.net.
Excellent.
For me, it's a favorite. It's the one that opens. It's the one that opens on my screen. And communitylibrary.net, and that's the end of my email address. So yeah, so communitylibrary.net.
And you said that your services
Yeah,
and programs are all listed?
Yeah, we have a very good website. I have an excellent webmaster. My communications department does a great job, and we're always trying to improve it. So it's hard to answer the question about programs, but I will say, you know, that it's certainly something I'm interested in as the director. I know the board is interested in, and that is to sort of hopefully create maybe a renaissance or a rebirth in an appreciation for the classics. So I know that coming up in our adult program department, we have, I think that's the 250th anniversary of Jane Austen.
Okay.
I think it's in December. And then I think we're looking at sort of Shakespeare-based programs, theater in the park type stuff. So, and I know in the children's we have a program in the children's department. I think it's called Wild Readers, and it focuses on classics. I know they're going to be looking at it's sort of a STEAM-based program, ages 5 to 12. But I know that some of the items on their list come up: Chronicles of Narnia and Treasure Island, Island of the Blue Dolphins, Stuart Little, others. So. It's definitely, I'm very interested in, and this goes back to the whole idea of the quality of the collection, right? That's if we're just a vending machine for the New York Times bestseller list or something like that, then that's not paying the proper due to our profession, right? So it is our profession to curate quality collections, and so you take that curation of the quality collection and then you bring it to life in programming, right?
Oh, that's a good way of putting it,
that, I mean, that it's all connected, right? It's not, programs don't exist on their own, right? And I'm definitely interested in creating a great programming department for adults and for children. And the idea is that, yeah, you start with that foundation, which is the repository of human knowledge and experience in information resources, and then you move out from there to public services, to programming. So yeah, again, we have a lot of programs. I just didn't want to rattle off a bunch, but one of the focuses is definitely going to be to you know, to have that programming kind of on one hand turn inward toward the collection, and then go back out to the public and say, hey, this is, you know, this is our collection coming to life, and how to interact with it.
Next year you might have a really fun platform for that with the 250th anniversary of the founding of our nation.
That's true.
Yeah,
That's true.
so that would be an opportunity for that kind of thing. Well, so I want to thank you. This has all been very informative, and I think the audience will deeply appreciate the time that you've spent explaining it. Before we wrap up, is there anything else you would like to share?
No, I'm very grateful, obviously, for this opportunity, and I do want to just make sure that you know, the patrons of the Community Library Network, they are the people I'm committed to, and you know, I want to make the best possible library service and collection, you know, for the CLN patrons, and I'll make sure, no matter what happens with CIN, that the CLN patrons will still get top quality library services.
Very good. Thank you, sir.
Thank you so much.
Appreciate it.